Hi. So I've been getting lots of questions, as you'd be unsurprised to hear, about inflation and how can you model that in Safran Risk, if at all. Can you model inflation in Safran Risk? So yes, you can. And there's probably 4 methods, but I'm going to focus on just 2, and I'm going to try and spread that across 2 videos just to keep the videos nice and short. But effectively, the third way would be, if you were to just be quite simplistic about things, you could just put a risk in your risk register and just say, well, that's going to model inflation as a relative percentage, job done. But it's not very sophisticated, so you might be called out for doing it that way. And then the 4th method would be to write using JavaScript. But there are facilities within the software that is just going to be easier for you to use. So we'll look at the first one today. I'm just going to call this method 1 and introduce you to that. So we're just looking at Safran Risk right now. What we're actually looking at is the schedule screen. But if we just move over here, you can see that it's resource loaded. So we're going to be looking at a kind of resource loaded approach today for method 1. And we'll be talking about the pros and cons. So as you can see, each activity has been assigned some costs, some quantities. They multiply up against the number of days that are going to be required and thus give you a total planned cost that you can see up here. Now, if I change the view from here to resource view, you can see that when you click on any individual activity, you get a list of all the resources that you have created and defined and assigned to that. And you can see a kind of graphical representation of the proportion of that activity's cost coming through over time. And if I was to just click on data view, you can see that you can create your own calendars, profiles, resources as required. And by profiles, what we actually mean is things like when you're front loading, rear loading, the cost spend profile over time. So you can do all that. You can manipulate anything you like in here. Now, what the purpose of showing you this is going to be is this thing here called complex rates. So we're going to be looking at how we use complex rates for method 1. So you can see that it's grayed out. Now, the reason it's grayed out is because it's defaulted to being on simple rates. What we are going to do is we're going to change that. So if you were in Safran, you'd want to change that either as part of the import process when you bring in like an XER file, you can change it at that point there. But if you need to do it retrospectively, click on project, go over to the properties of the project over here, and then you can see down at the bottom, simple versus complex rates. So if you select and toggle complex rates on, this is going to say, I'd like to go and do some stuff now, and then it will recalculate as required. Okay, so that allows us to come over here onto the admin screen, go to the rate sets, and we can actually say which one we're going to use. We might say we're going to use the IPM complex rate set 6, and then you can see that there's already some items in here. And effectively what we're looking at is over time, you can see you can assign a date and then what a rate is going to be. So we'll be looking at an example in a moment where it's going to be a bit more simplified, where we're just going to increase the inflation rate from $8,889 or pounds, euros, whatever you're using, and then we're going to multiply that up by sort of 10% increase per period. Now, it could be per year, but in this case, it's going to be effectively just be per month. So what I've done is I've manually calculated what that 10% increase would be, and then I've done a 10% increase of that onto this one, and then 10% increase of that one to get the 4th iteration. So that's how I've worked that out, and I've had to do a little bit of manual calculations. There's no facility to automatically do that using this method. Method 2, however, will be where we kind of challenge that and do something different. So we just opened up this alternative schedule here with just a single activity. One activity, going to hire a crane, and it's going to take 10 days deterministic, and then the minimum duration might be 5 days, probably going to be 10 is most likely, and then maybe as long as 60 days. So we've just got that one thing there. There's going to be no risks on the risk register or anything like that. We're just going to use the 3-point estimates direct from the schedule here. And you can see at the bottom here that the calendar that's been assigned is a sort of standard working calendar in terms of 5 days a week. We're not going to work weekends. So that means any delays carry through and over those Saturday, Sunday, that's the calendar we're using. Now, what I want to impress upon you is that because we've actually got in terms of the data, the resource rate set has been assigned. We just looked at a moment ago, so this will be familiar to you. So you can see that these are the same rates that we just saw a moment ago. So they've increased by 10% and then 10% and then 10% per period, which in this case is going to be the beginning of the month for the next few months. So when we run the Monte Carlo simulation, that activity is going to stray into these alternative time brackets or periods. They're going to cross those thresholds, and cost escalation will be witnessed. So we go to our Analyze tab, we'll run an item here. So the first thing that it's done is given us a duration of 29 days. So that means that the initial 10 days duration has definitely been exceeded, and we've gone through or over into the next time period, incurred a cost there at that rate. We've not quite got enough delay there to take us into October, so we've not gone into a double inflated calculation, whereas I think if we just, there we are, we just clicked one more iteration on the step through, and that one actually has taken us through. So we're going to be charging a rate at the original rate, then at 10% increased, and then 10% increased on the September rate. So we can see that on the Gantt chart. So that's what's going to happen, and then we hit complete, and it's going to take us through. We'll see the cost outcome on that. So here's one that I prepared earlier using a different model, so not just that single sort of tower crane. So there's a bit more complexity, there's a few more moving parts, components, risks, calendars, activities, resources, all kinds of different things going on here. But effectively, it allows us to drop in a single point answer for our deterministic into our distribution comparison part of the database, and then we can see that we've got our simple rates calculation. So this is just when it's a resource loaded program but with no cost escalation over time. So that's the gray S-curve, and then we can toggle on the complex rates, so you can see that there is some movement towards the right. So there is indeed increased cost escalation. Because we can see that there is this effect, doesn't mean it's necessarily telling the full story, because there's pros and cons of the method, and one of the significant cons of a resource loaded program is that it can't necessarily have estimating uncertainty applied to it. There are other things going on. The costs themselves, like the base price per widget, per unit of a widget, is maybe uncertain, and then you might have uncertainty on the scope, like, so how many of the widgets are you going to need, and how much does each individual widget cost? There's uncertainty there. So when you start factoring in those extra things, you can see we've got a few more here. If I just add in this alternative method that we're going to be looking at in the next video, when you look at this curve, it's a different shape. It's no longer perfectly parallel, so it's clearly doing something different. Despite having cost escalation in there, is it enough? Now, what I've actually done with this curve here, that's actually not including the schedule related risks. So actually, when I turn that one on, you can see there's another curve even further out. So there's a pretty big difference between, if I just turn off the simple rates and the one where the scheduling risks were off. So we're just now looking at those scenarios, and they're pretty different. There's quite a lot of hidden cost in between these 2 points at, say, the P80 level. So method 1 is good, but method 2, I think we should be looking at in a bit more detail in the next video. So effectively, what we're looking at here is quick and easy to set up, because you can just put in these incremental values, and you can timestamp exactly when they're going to occur. The interpretation of those results should then be quite simple, because you can say, well, here it is with and here it is without, and that allows you to then also define that scenario and say, well, what if it's not just 10%, 10%, 10%? What if it's 2% first period, 8% the next period, goes up higher, it peaks, and then in subsequent periods starts coming down. The cons of this method is that it's deterministic, so effectively it's a single point answer, and you're having a guess at what that single point's going to be, rather than giving yourself a bit of leeway and saying, well, it's actually going to be either side of a particular point. And there's also some manual calculation in there, so I had to sort of get a calculator out and go, well, I'm going to put 10% or 12.5% inflation, whatever it might be, and put that into the system. So what we'll be doing next time is looking at method 2, which is when we're actually using a probabilistic method where it randomly samples what the inflation is going to be, and we'll look at the pros and cons of that in the next video. So thank you very much. I hope that was of interest, and look out for the next video in this sort of two-part series.